This is the valuation model for Costco, the start file that I had mentioned we're going to start our valuation on. Now, what I've done is instead of starting from complete scratch, I've actually started by giving you this file. So we're going to have all a base starting point to make our lives a little bit easier. And I'm just doing that given the condensed nature of our semester, since we only are meeting for 7 weeks. So what I'm going to do here is just kind of give you a brief overview of the model. So the idea of the model is that these are the historical income statements, balance sheet. It's organized in a series of tabs. The tabs generally move from left to right. So these are historical financial statement data. Income statement, balance sheet, cash flow are the first 3 tabs. I can make it a little bit bigger so it's easier to see. Okay. So in order to value a company, let's go back to our process. We need to first convert the financial statements of the company. Then what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to forecast the statements. Right? Now, if you want to talk about it on a process level, one of the challenges with forecasting financial statements is it's hard to forecast them directly. So process-wise, what we're going to do is we're going to use this model to help us forecasting the statements by forecasting what's called the ratios. So the historical statements create historical ratios. We forecast the ratios, and those forecasted ratios get us the forecasted statements. So at a very high level, that's what we're about to do, is we're going to use this model to help us forecast financial statements. So here's the historical statements, income statement, balance sheet, cash flow, and these statements come in a standard format from Bloomberg. Okay, so if you spit the statements out of Bloomberg, these are the format that Bloomberg gives you. What I then do, skipping over a couple of tabs, is then I have a tab called the income tab, and I have a tab called the balance tab for the income statement and balance sheet. I recreate the income statement and balance sheet in the model by referring to the data on those first couple tabs. I do this for 2 reasons. Right? 1, I need to make sure that my statements add up, they foot. Because if my statements don't balance, then we know when we convert them to economic format, we'll never be able to get converted statements that work. And when we used to use Thomson Reuters as our data source, except for instead of Bloomberg, Thomson Reuters would regularly give you statements that didn't add up, which never made any sense to me. But these paid data services would give you a balance sheet that didn't balance. And the reason it wouldn't balance is they would just exclude items. Or worse, they would restate the statements, but they wouldn't restate them all. And so you could never match what was actually in the 10K. All right, that's one of the reasons why I like Bloomberg, is they're expensive, but they're good. So if you have a number in Bloomberg, unless they made a mistake, which they rarely do, it's going to match what's in the 10K. All right, and they're going to give you balancing statements. But nonetheless, it doesn't hurt to recreate your income statement, take your revenue, subtract all the expenses, and see if you get the same net income as what the company gave you. All right. The other reason I do this, reason number 2, is we're about to forecast the statements. And when Bloomberg gives us the data, it gives us the most current year on the left. And we're going to want the most current year on the right because we're going to forecast into the future. Okay. So I also rearrange the statements so that previous years are on the left, future years on the right. And this is where we're going to forecast the statements. So I have an income statement, a balance sheet, and I also have a change in equity statement, which is the 4th gap statement for the change in equity financial position statement. So we can figure out whether the company issued or repurchased shares or changed their minority interest, and whether the accountants made other adjustments to equity. And again, that's just done historically based on mapping to the Bloomberg data. You don't have to do anything here. All right, what I then do is I have a tab called TFI. And I have already rearranged the Bloomberg formatted statements into a correctly formatted TFI. So basically what you did for your homework assignment, I did as my homework assignment with actual financial data. Okay, so here's the reorganized TFI. The next tab is TII. Here's the reorganized and balancing TII. And here is the reorganized and balancing CFI. Okay, so again, in the interest of time, rather than making you take the actual Bloomberg financial statements and reorganize them, I've done that for you. Okay, so you'll continue to practice doing this on your midterm, but I am showing you this to kind of skip a step and give you correctly formatted statements. So you might say, well, gee, why are we doing this again on the midterm? Because it's ultimately useful to reformat the statements so you know what you're looking at with these statements that we're looking, because they can get pretty complex. But nonetheless, here's the reorganized CFI. Right? Then here is the economic profit, which we went over tonight, calculated based on beginning of year data. Here is the economic profit calculated based on end of year data. One is based on beginning of year invested capital, the other is based on end of year invested capital. So I did both. Then there's something called the ROIC drivers. We're going to do a tree-based historical analysis of ROIC, which we'll cover in a future class, right? So I've already set up so that the tree is auto-filled based on historical data, okay? And here's a historical ROIC chart of Costco based on beginning of year ROIC, right? So that's pretty much most of the model, right? Now the final two tabs of the model are the assumptions tab and the ratios tab, okay? The ratios tab is just that. It's the historical income statement and balance sheet ratios for Costco. Right? And this is the critical tab, because what we're about to do is we're about to forecast the ratios. And when we forecast the ratios, it's going to give us forecasted income statements and balance sheets. Okay? So this is the ratios tab. And finally, there's this miscellaneous assumptions tab. And you'll notice that there's some yellow colored cells on this worksheet. One of the best practices that the book talks about that we're going to follow when we build out financial models of companies is we want to limit the amount of assumptions that we change to as few places as possible so that our life does not get overly difficult when we're trying to make changes to the assumptions. So rather than scattering our assumptions all throughout our model, which makes our model hard to use and reuse, we're going to consolidate all the assumptions to one place. The other reason why I made the use of the color yellow is any cell that's yellow is telling me that that's a cell I can change. I can do a what if based on. Any cell that's not yellow, I don't want to change because it's probably a calculated result. Because the other key thing I've said on this model is everything is a relative reference. Meaning if you look at the income tab, revenue for 2007 refers to the data tab. The year refers to the assumptions B2 tab. So the nice thing is if I change any data, it flows throughout the whole model. So I don't want to go in and break my model, so I got to be careful about what I change. So I chose yellow. You can choose any color you want, but I would recommend using color to help you understand these are things I could change, these are things I want to leave alone. Matter of fact, if you really know Excel, you might even want to lock some of these tabs so that you can't change them in the future. Okay? Makes it harder to make mistakes and prevents you from breaking your model. Right? So here's the process. Now, I'm going to show you the process to put it on video, but I've already done this process for you. Okay? So when you do your group projects, this is what you're going to have to do with your companies that you're going to choose tonight before you leave. So at the next break, I'm going to give you the industry again. You're going to pick your companies, and you're going to tell me which company you're valuing as your group project. We're going to make sure everybody's in a team tonight. Okay? And then in 4 weeks, you're going to be presenting these back here in class. Right? So here's what you're going to have to do in Bloomberg. So you go to a Bloomberg terminal, and if the software is not loaded, you click on the icon and you load the software. Now when it loads, you'll notice that there's a serial number at the bottom of the terminal. The serial number is how Bloomberg prevents you from loading the software on your own laptop or desktop at home. Because you can go to their website, you can download and install the software. But then in order to actually activate and use the software, you have to pay them and they're going to give you a serial number. So this laptop actually has a paid serial number from Bloomberg, which is how I'm able to use it on this laptop. It's considered a terminal and under the school's license. So choose your language. In this case, I'm going to choose English. Hit the Go or Enter key. Again, this is where you would create your new login if you hadn't created a login already. But in this case, assuming you have, type in your username and password. Now, once you've logged in, then you'll come to the home screen, and they just have this menu bar. You can start typing in the company's ticker symbol or company name. In this case, Costco. And it'll start narrowing the list of securities that match Costco. In this case, Costco, COST is their ticker symbol. US means they're a US company. And equity, which means I'm evaluating the equity, as opposed to Costco Corp, which is their debt. So remember, Bloomberg's a big fixed income data service. So anything with a corp is their debt, so that would be their bonds, versus equity would be evaluating their stock. Okay? So I go to Costco US Equity, and it gives me this starting menu. Now, there's a few pieces of data that we're going to need to do our valuation with. All right, and I'll get to some of those later. But we'll start out with, under company analysis, there's a screen called Financial Analysis, short code FA. I can either type in FA and hit Enter, because Bloomberg started in the 80s, and they still leave these short codes in their data service, because a lot of financial people just remember them. Or I could click on Financial Analysis from the menu, and it will bring me to this screen. And on this screen is all of the historical financial statements for a company. Matter of fact, here is for fiscal 2013, the reported results for Costco, as well as the estimates for 2014, 2015. And again, another nice feature of the Bloomberg Data Service is if I click on any of these numbers, it'll tell me how they calculated them. And if I click on it even further, it'll actually bring up the 10K. So it basically just shows me that, yes, they did get the number out of the 10K, they just didn't make it up, right? Which again is a real value to the data service. So I'm going to close out of that. So again, typically within a day of them releasing their data to the SEC website, the data has been updated on Bloomberg for big companies. So again, it's an almost real-time database. So again, it's a big advantage to this. So here's the thing. They have a series of tabs, and one of the tabs is key stats, key statistics, and a series of sub-tabs. But in this case, IS, or income statement, is a tab. These are the historical income statements for Costco in this case, already filled in for me. Now you'll notice that the sub-tab says standardized. This is the advantage of a data service like Bloomberg. So somebody at Bloomberg has gone through Costco's 10K and 10Q and mapped it to a standardized format in Bloomberg. The advantage to us is when we take a company's data and we spit it out, it will always come out in this format. That's going to be very important for us when we do the valuation model, because we want the valuation model to be consistent, so we want consistently formatted items. As opposed to, if you go to as reported, here's how they reported it on their 10K, which you'll notice is different by company, because every company under the accounting rules can have slightly different 10Ks. But Bloomberg has standardized the 10Ks. So here's what we're going to do. Under the standardized 10K, standardized income statement data, there's an option in Bloomberg called Output. You click on Output, and then you click Excel. And then what's going to happen is it's going to dump all of the data, historical income statement data, into an Excel-based spreadsheet. Now, Microsoft, every time Bloomberg does this, is going to give you a security warning, just because Microsoft is trying to be friendly and prevent you from doing things that you actually want to do. So every time you have to say yes to Microsoft. Yes, it's okay to import this data. So then what's going to happen is it's going to import the data. So there's all their historical data in Excel format. Now, here's the next challenge you're going to run into. These aren't numbers. These are database lookup fields. Which means if I save this spreadsheet and I walk out of the Bloomberg computer area and I open it up on my computer without Bloomberg installed, I'm just going to get a bunch of errors. right? Because it's actually getting real-time access to the database here and pulling the data from the database with an authenticated login with the fact that the database is actually on or accessible on the Bloomberg terminal. So if you leave the lab, you'll have garbage. So here's what you're going to have to do to get around this. You select the whole tab. You copy the whole tab. You paste special the whole tab, values. Hit OK. And what that's going to tell Excel to do is overwrite everything with the numbers. So it'll wipe out all the formulas, all the database lookups, and it'll give me a bunch of numbers. Now when I save it and open it up, I'll have data on my laptop, and I can leave the lab and use the data. Right? The advantage of this is now my data is portable. The disadvantage to this is that if I actually had the original Excel file that Bloomberg gave me, every time I opened up Excel, it would pull the most recent data. So I trade off the ability to move it out of the lab because I don't have a license for losing the flexibility to always have it constantly refreshed. Right? But for our purposes, this is what you're going to have to do. The other thing that you're going to have to do is, since everything in Excel refers to this tab, Excel does not like pound NAs. Excel chokes on these. The formulas break. So you have to get rid of these. So Control F is the search command in Excel. I search for pound n/a space n/a, and I replace these not available with zeros. So that way I have a clean formatted statement that Excel's not going to choke on. File, save as, Excel workbook, and in this case I'll put it on my hard drive, and I'm going to call this cost-is. All right, Costco income statement. All right, I'm going to do the same process a little bit faster for the balance sheet. So click on the balance sheet tab, make sure I'm on standardized, output to Excel. Go to the security warning, which is hidden behind the menu. Say yes to the security warning. Wait for the data to import. Select it, copy, paste special, values, hit OK. Find any pound n/a space n/a's, replace them all with zeros. Then save this as an Excel workbook, not a web page. And this is my Costco balance sheet. Finally, my third statement is the statement of cash flow. Standardized cash flow statement, output it to Excel. Again, go back to Excel, yes to the security warning. It'll sit there all day if you don't hit yes, and it's hidden behind the windows. So that's why I'm showing you that piece. Select it, copy, paste special, values, hit OK. Control F, find all my pound and A's, replace them with zeros. File, save as, Excel workbook, Costco-CF. So I now have the income statement, balance sheet, cash flow, historical data. All right. So here's what you're going to need to do. In Canvas, I had already put those files up there. Okay, so there's the income statement, balance sheet, cash flow. You're going to need to download those 3 files to your laptop. You're going to need those files to do what we're about to do. So I went the extra step and I just showed you on video so that you know how to do this and get those files. All right, later you can watch the video as you're working on the Bloomberg terminal. But once you have those files, we're going to have to put that data into Costco. Now the reason why we're going to have to put that data into Costco is because the Excel spreadsheet that I gave you, the starting spreadsheet, came from last spring. So in the spring version of this class, we valued Costco. So what I did is I took the valuation model and I wiped out all the future data references. Okay, so that's actually how we got the starting model. So I started with the starting model, we built out the future model, we put in the data, we valued Costco, I wiped it all out. We're going to go recreate it. But here's the point. The data for Costco is 6 months old. And Costco has come out subsequent to this with their 2013 results. So fiscal 2012 was what was available 6 months ago. Fiscal 2013 is now available today. So I have to update my model with the most recent data that I just exported from Bloomberg, right? So here's what's going to happen. So I'm going to go to Costco. I'm going to open up the income statement data. I'm going to copy the income statement data from the Costco IS file that's on, Canvas, called Blackboard for some reason. I'm going to go to the Data IS tab. I'm going to select the whole Data IS tab. I'm going to paste special values, and I'm basically going to overwrite the whole tab with the most recent data. It's very important to paste special values, not copy paste. If you copy paste, you'll make relative references to the other spreadsheet. And then every time you open the spreadsheet, it's going to ask you for the other spreadsheet. You don't want to do that. So if you just copy paste special values, you just move the data without any references. So there's advantages of copy paste special values because you can overwrite formulas. You can also quickly move data between tabs. Yes?
So the income statement, cash flow, and balance sheet that you just saved from Bloomberg, did you also upload to Canvas, or you saved them on your?
I had previously uploaded to Canvas before the class started. So I'm saying is those 3 files are the same updated data that you need to grab those 3 files from Canvas. You need to put them on your laptops, and you need to do what I'm doing. Okay, so you need to basically overwrite the data file. Very important that you overwrite the whole tab because this model will assume that revenue is always on row 14. And if revenue is not on row 14, the model is going to be broken. So that's why it's important to overwrite the tab with standardized data. Because if revenue is ever not on row 14, then you're going to have problems. Same thing. If cost of revenue is not on row 15, we're going to have problems. So you have to overwrite it row for row. That's how you do it. Okay. Go to the balance sheet and do the same thing. So I'm going to take the Costco balance sheet. I'm going to copy it, the entire tab that I just downloaded. I'm going to come to my model, select the Costco balance sheet tab in my model, paste special values. So it's now updating the data. Finally, the cash flow tab. I'm going to go to the Costco cash flow file that I just downloaded, select the whole thing, copy the whole worksheet, come in here, data CF, select paste special values. Right? So now let's call this 760. So now what I've done is I've basically put in the most recent data for Costco. Right? Now again, trade-off. If I have access to a Bloomberg terminal, I could have actually put in the version of the Excel spreadsheet that actually had the formulas. And then what I could have done is every time I opened up Excel, as long as I had a Bloomberg terminal at hand, it would have just automatically uploaded the data and it automatically would have refreshed my entire model. Right? Because we don't have a terminal, that's why we're doing this copy-paste special step. So we can use the model without having a terminal at hand. Questions about what we just did?
I have a question about so when they do, the analysts do like consensus for the 2 out years, do you actually use that sometimes?
We'll be using that in about an hour and a half. Absolutely. We're going to use the consensus when we do our valuations. And it was funny, I had one of my undergrad students who said that the CFO of Costco is actually a family member and didn't realize that. And he said he went and he showed them the model that we built of Costco. And the CFO was like, wow, we actually do this. He was all excited because he basically showed them something that they actually do. So absolutely, this is stuff that you would do if you were actually doing this on Costco. All right. So back to this. So let's go to data, income statement, balance sheet. Notice that in my income tab, the most recent historical year is 2012, but for Costco, they've reported 2013. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. In the assumptions tab, one of my assumptions, starting out with a couple, we're going to add more, is last reported year. I'm going to change that to 2013. Here's the advantage of a relative model. Now, if I go to my income tab, 2013 is my last reported year. Okay, this is why it's an advantage to quickly put all of your assumptions in one place, so that if this ever happens and the company updates its data, one click, change the year, everything is already updated. I got my right relative references. So this is their most recent fiscal year reported data. Questions about what we just did? Okay. So what we're now going to do is we are going to start forecasting the income statement and balance sheets for Costco. And we are going to arbitrarily do an 11-year forecast. Okay? Because I said it's kind of difficult to figure out what the time horizon is. So since you're going to be valuing mature companies this semester, then I'm just going to say in 11 years, they'll all be mature. Since they're already pretty mature, they should all be mature in 11 years. So we're just going to practice by doing 11 years worth of forecast. Now, after we forecast 11 years of income statements and balance sheets, we're then going to convert that into economic statements. But our first step is to forecast 11 years worth of income statements and balance sheets. So here's the historical income statement. Here's the historical balance sheet. And I mentioned that we're going to do this off the ratios tab. So we're going to start forecasting based on these ratios. We'll start out with the income statement. Every one of these ratios is a percentage of revenue, with the one exception of the revenue growth rate. This is percentage change in revenue. And this just solves for the percentage change in revenue from the previous year. And this is percentage of revenue for that current year based on the historical data. So in order to forecast, what we're going to do, so here's where we start building our model, is in the ratios tab, my first forward year equals previous year plus 1. Again, relative references. Don't hard code in 2014, because if you do that, then when the model updates, it'll always say 2014. Okay, so equals previous year plus 1. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to say 2014, the revenue growth rate in 2014 equals the revenue growth rate in 2013. And I'm going to make that cell yellow. So I'm just saying that my revenue growth rate for next year as a starting placeholder is going to grow at the same rate that it's currently growing, 6%. Right? Everybody with me so far? Okay. Next, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say that the cost of revenue equals the previous year. And I'm going to make that yellow because that's another assumption I'm going to change. Which leads to the third ratio down, gross profit. Here's the challenge with gross profit. Gross profit is 1 minus cost of revenue. So I've already forecasted cost of revenue, so I probably don't want to forecast gross profit because it's based on my forecast from cost of revenue. So I'm going to solve for my gross profit equals 1 minus cost of revenue equals gross profit. Okay, so revenue minus cost of revenue equals gross profit. As a percentage, 1 minus the cost of revenue equals the gross profit percentage. And this highlights a choice that we are making in this valuation model. When we forecast the ratios, we either forecast the components or we forecast the results. Component, cost of revenue. Result, gross profit. We forecast gross profit, we solve for cost of revenue. We forecast cost of revenue, we solve for gross profit. We have to make that choice. The choice that I'm making is we're going to forecast the components, cost of revenue, and that's going to give us the result, gross profit. Questions about that? You could do it the other way. I just happen to be doing it this way in this model. All right. Next, operating expenses. Component, equals the previous year. Something we're going to forecast, yellow. EBITDA, gross profit minus operating expenses equals EBITDA. Solve for. Equals gross profit minus operating expenses. Next, depreciation amortization, the DA, equals previous year, yellow. Operating income, also known as EBIT, equals EBITDA minus DA. Solve. Tax rate equals previous year. I'm going to make that yellow because that's something I could change in the future. I need a representative tax rate for Costco. No plat equals operating income times left paren 1 minus the tax rate. Right paren. No plat is the operating income after tax. So I just multiply by 1 minus the tax rate that I just forecast. Solve for. Nope. I equaled the previous year. I referenced it as a starting point. All right? Non-operating gains and losses equal the previous year. Now, realistically, the equal the previous year will change later, but I'm just putting these as a placeholder in the model now until we start changing it later. Questions about what we just did? All right, then what we want to do, by the way, another Excel trick, don't click and drag. Microsoft will mess you up, all right, because it sometimes will try and do you a favor when you click and drag, and it'll say, oh, you're trying to set up a series, and then it'll copy it as a series, and we don't always want it to copy it as a series. So when you copy and move things in our version of Excel, for your own benefit, don't click and drag. Copy, paste, okay, or copy, paste special values. Don't click and drag. Be warned about that. So what I'm going to do is for 2014, I'm going to take everything we've just done, and I'm going to copy it. I'm going to move it out 11 years. And I'm going to paste it to 2024. So there's 11 years worth of forecasted income statements, assuming that the ratios stay the same. Now later we'll change the ratios, but now we're going to start them the same. Everybody see what we just did? Okay. Now we're going to start building the actual income statements for Costco. So I'm going to go to my income tab. Again, make it a little bit bigger so it's hopefully a little bit easier to see. So I'm going to start out with column H. I'm going to identify, because eventually I'm going to print this out, that this is my forecast, which is different than my historical data. So I can delineate when I switched periods. It's easier in the ratio tab because we introduced the color yellow. In the income statement tab, we're not going to introduce yellow. So I just need to know what's historical, what's forecast. You can do it in colors if you want, as we build. But here's the thing. Year equal previous year plus 1. Relative years. 2014 is my first year. Now, 2014 revenue. I have a revenue growth rate. So what I'm going to do in my income tab is I'm going to say equals previous year revenue, 2013 revenue, times left paren 1 plus my growth rate, 2014 growth rate. So, and I'm going to format this as the dollars accounting, I say currency, but in the accounting format to 1 decimal place to match the rest of this. So here's the idea. If Costco grows an additional 6.1% in 2014, their revenue would grow to 111 billion and change, 540 million. Don't do what I'm about to do. Okay? Eventually, here's what we'll do. I can come back to this ratio. I could change this to 3%. Well, now my revenue is 108 billion. right? So as I change the ratios, these numbers will automatically adjust. For now, we're not changing the ratios. For now, we're just leaving in the current ratios of 2013, and then we'll change the ratios later. Is everybody with me on that? So right now, just the 6% growth rate. There's my revenue forecast for 2014. Next, cost of revenue. I'm kind of following the income statement format here. Cost of revenue equals, from my ratios tab, this is the cost of revenue as a percentage of revenue 2014. So that percentage, ratios H3, times, from my income tab, 2014 forecasted revenue. And for formatting, I'm going to format this whole column so I don't have to keep doing it row by row. So again, if I have 86.5% of that sale number, I get that cost of revenue. Right? Next, gross profit. Revenue minus cost of revenue equals gross profit equals revenue minus cost of revenue. That's my forecast for gross profit in dollars. Operating expenses equals ratios. Operating expenses as a percentage of revenue for 2014 times income tab, 2014 revenue. EBITDA equals gross profit forecast in dollars minus operating expenses in dollars. Depreciation and amortization equals ratios, depreciation and amortization as a percentage of sales in 2014, times income tab, 2014 revenue. Operating income equals EBITDA minus depreciation and amortization. So what we've done is we very quickly forecasted the operating income for Costco for 2014. Before we go any further, questions about how we got there? Yes?
Can you just go back and hover over the formulas real quick? I didn't get
Which formula are you looking for?
All
All of them?
Starting with the EBITDA.
So EBITDA, I'm just following this format over here. Gross profit minus operating expenses equals EBITDA. Another hint is EBITDA's formula is also in 2013. Okay. But in this case, it's the gross profit minus the operating expenses. Gross profit, again, is revenue minus cost of revenue. Just following down the page. All right, now we got to operating income. Next, we have interest expense. Now, interest expense wasn't a ratio that we forecasted. And here's one of the things the book talks about with enterprise DCF. One of the things about enterprise DCF is we assume a constant capital structure for the firm, therefore a target capital structure. So if the capital structure is not going to change, then the interest expense probably isn't going to change much either. So what we're going to do, and you'll find very quickly that the interest expense has no impact on the valuation whatsoever. It's really just so you have an income statement. And when you do valuations, companies like to see their forecasted statements, but you really don't need to do this. But we're going to do this so we forecast the statements out correctly. So interest expense just equals the previous year. I mean, I could create an additional ratio where I have like an interest rate times my debt to get an interest expense. But for practical purposes, just equal the previous year as placeholder. Foreign exchange gains and losses. I'm just going to set those to 0 because basically firms tend to hedge. And so they tend to hedge so that their gains and losses are minimized. So therefore, I'm not going to forecast them. I'm going to assume that they're hedged. Now, let's say a company doesn't hedge and I wanted to forecast gains and losses, then I could. Right? But increasingly, most companies are not trying to take the risk of foreign exchange gains and losses, and they're trying to match their cash flows as much as they can so they don't have gains and losses on currency changes. So in this case, let's assume that that should be 0 for most companies and that they're going to hedge and try and be NPV 0 on their currency. Okay. Next, non-operating gains and losses equals from the ratios, 2014 non-operating gains and losses as a percentage, times from the income tab, 2014 revenue, gets me my pre-tax income. Following the formulas on the left, pre-tax income equals operating income minus interest expense minus FX minus non-operating gains and losses. 3.242 billion. Income taxes equals pre-tax income multiply that by ratios 2014 forecasted tax rate. Income before extraordinary items equals pre-tax income minus taxes. Extraordinary loss net of tax, 0. The key word is extraordinary. If it's an extraordinary item, it shouldn't happen again. So we're not going to forecast extraordinary items in the future. By definition, they shouldn't occur in the future. 0. Minority interest. If we're going to hold a constant capital structure, whatever minority dividends we're paying, we're going to keep paying. Equals whatever minority dividends we're already paying. Minority interest equals the previous year. Okay. Net income equals income before extraordinary items minus extraordinary items minus the minority interest. 2168.2. Cash dividends. If we're paying dividends, we're going to keep paying the dividends. Equal the previous year. Other adjustments. 0. These are accounting adjustments. Generally, we're not going to forecast accounting adjustments. Okay, so we're just going to leave those at 0. Now again, anything I'm putting at 0, if you feel is important to forecast, you're welcome to do it. I'm putting them at 0 because they're irrelevant to the valuations. Just to make life easier. Net income available to common shareholders equals net income minus preferred dividends minus adjustments. Abnormal gains and losses. The key word is abnormal. That means they shouldn't happen all the time. Now, ironically, for Costco, they happen every year. All right? But they shouldn't. They're abnormal. So we're going to forecast these as 0 and say that even though we've seen them happen for 6 straight years, they shouldn't happen in the future. So 0. They're abnormal. Normalized income equals net income to common shareholders minus abnormal gains and losses. Actually, it's a gain, plus, sorry. Equals normalized income plus abnormal gains and losses. Doesn't matter because they're going to be 0 either way. Finally, dividends. Whatever dividends we're paying, we're going to keep on paying. Quirk of the data. On the Bloomberg Income Statement tab, all of the expenses are listed as positive numbers. On the Bloomberg Cash Flow tab, dividends are a negative number. So I know it says normalized income minus dividend paid, but the model is giving us a negative amount for the dividends. So again, we have to kind of decide here what we want to do. So in this case, for change in retained earnings, equals normalized income plus the negative dividends. That's how much our retained earnings would change, because net income minus dividends equals retained earnings. So that's how much our retained earnings would change if we paid out that level of dividend. Questions about that income statement?
So are you going to go over, because history says that they're normally not going to pay out $3 billion in dividends?
We'll forecast that separately. Other question?
I was spacing on the income tax expense.
On which one? Income, which one?
Tax expense.
So for the income tax expense, we take the pre-tax income and we multiply it by the tax rate, which was on the ratios tab, the H9. All right, so here's what we do. We go to our 2014 income statement. We take everything we just did, we copy it, and we paste it out 10 more years to 2024. Now, when you see these pounds, that means that the cell's not big enough to hold the data. So I can select all of that range and just take one of the middle ones and expand it. But basically, what we now have is a forecasted income statement for 11 years. That took 25 minutes. Questions about what we just did? Right. So, don't do this, right? But here's what I mean. This is what we're going to go do later, not now. On the ratios tab, 6% revenue growth in 2014, which is what they're growing now. If they grow at 6% for the next 11 years, their revenue will grow from 105 billion to 201 billion. Okay? Watch what happens if they only grow at 2% a year. Now they only have 131 billion of revenue in the year 2024. That 4% difference in the growth rate was $70 billion worth of revenue. All right? That's why, for example, the G, the sustainable growth rate, matters so much for a company. You can clearly see it here in the model, is that a couple of percentage points of growth, when you compound it over time, lead to substantial differences in revenue and therefore cash flow and therefore valuation. Right? So again, I'm going to undo this. I'm going to leave it at that 6%. Because again, we'll change this later once we've built out the rest of the model, but that's what we'll be able to start to quickly do. We change the assumptions, the statements auto-adjust, the cash flows auto-adjust. Right, that's what we're building. Okay, income statement down, balance sheet to go. Now, here's the quicker version of the balance sheet. In the reading for the book, one of the things that McKinsey argued was they said when you forecast balance sheet ratios, you should find the driver on the income statement that it's related to and forecast to the driver on the income statement. So for example, if I forecast accounts receivable, I should forecast it based on revenue. If I forecast inventory, I should forecast it based on cost of goods sold or cost of revenue. That's ideal. But practically, we're going to do it a slightly different way for ease of use. Instead of forecasting everything as a driver, all of these ratios are forecasted as a percentage of revenue. Okay? So basically, we're going to simplify. All right? Two reasons we're going to do it. One, it is simple. Okay? So it does make our lives easier. And it doesn't really get you that much better of a result if you go granular versus the simplistic approach. Because you can still change the drivers. But here's the advantage of the approach I'm about to give you. Which is if we make everything a percentage of revenue, as revenue grows, the balance sheet grows. And if the ratios stay the same, then it gives us the notion of what's called constant productivity, constant cycle time, constant efficiency. So gross investment is change in the balance sheet. So as the balance sheet grows as the same percentage of revenue, the model will essentially automatically create for you the future gross investments for the future free cash flows. So it actually makes our lives easier with what we eventually have to forecast. And most of the time, analysts don't forecast substantial changes in balance sheets, meaning they tend to forecast the balance sheet as a percentage stays about the same. DSO stays the same. Inventory turns, inventory days stay the same. PP&E utilization rates stay about the same. So doing everything as a percentage of sales kind of takes care of that for us without having a lot of work to be done. Now, again, granularly, when we do the valuation, you can always go in and change any assumption you feel is appropriate. I'm just trying to simplify it as we get started. So here's what we're going to do. For accounts and notes receivable, equal the previous year. I'm going to make that cell yellow. I'm going to copy it, and I'm going to paste it all the way down and across. So I basically have 11 years worth of balance sheet ratios already forecasted out. Now I chose arbitrarily to forecast these 9 balance sheet ratios. You could put in more or less, but these are the 9 that we're going to choose in this model that we're building. Okay, just like I chose the income statement ratios. So now we got to build out the balance sheet. We go to the balance sheet tab. Just like we did with the income statement, I'm going to label this the forecast period. And then equals previous year plus 1, relative reference for the years. There's actually a 10th ratio that we're going to forecast, and the 10th ratio is operating cash. The assumption for operating cash is on the assumptions page. And right now, operating cash is listed as 2% of revenue. So the idea here is 1/50th of the year, 1 week of the year is operating cash. That's our starting assumption. We can always change the percentage later. So here's what we're going to do. On the income tab, on the balance sheet tab for operating cash in 2014 equals from the assumptions tab, 2% of revenue, times from the income tab, 2014 revenue. That's my 2014 operating cash. I'm going to format this whole column to the currency accounting 1 decimal place, just to match the previous formatting. Okay? Now, one additional part of this, you'll notice in the ratios tab that all these ratios are forecast in the future year by year by year by year. On the assumptions tab, it's not. It's only one number. So here's going to be the problem when I copy and paste in just a few minutes. If I copy and paste my balance sheet to 2015 and 2016, it's going to give me zeros. Because when Excel copies and pastes, it says take assumptions B3, assumptions C3, assumptions D3. And I don't have anything in the out years for C3 and D3. So what I need to do here is I need to make this on my balance sheet what's called an absolute reference. So in Excel, the way you do that is in front of the B, you put a $sign, or what used to be called the string character. So $B, $3. That tells Excel to make it an absolute reference. Now when I copy and paste, it will always be cell B3, cell B3. Okay? So basically a $sign in front of the B, $sign in front of the 3. No matter where I copy and paste in my model, it will always use just that one cell. So that's one additional adjustment that we need to make here. All right, now I'm ready to work on my balance sheet ratios. My first balance sheet ratio is accounts receivable. So I come down here to accounts and notes receivable equals ratios 2014 accounts receivable as a percentage times income tab 2014 revenue. Inventory equals from my ratios tab 2014 inventory times from my income tab 2014 revenue. Other current assets equals ratios 2014 other current assets times income tab 2014 revenue. Long-term investments is the next one. Equals, make sure we're doing the right cell, equals ratios, right now there's 0, so 2014 long-term investments for Costco times income 2014 revenue. Next is net fixed assets. Equals ratios 2014 net fixed assets as a percentage of revenue times income 2014 revenue. The next one is other long-term assets equals from the ratios, 2014 other long-term assets, times income, 2014 revenue. The next is accounts payable, equals ratios, 2014 accounts payable, times income, 2014 revenue. Other short-term liabilities, equals, on the ratios tab, 2014 other short-term liabilities, times income, 2014 revenue. And finally, we had other long-term liabilities, equals, assumption ratios, 2014 other long-term liabilities, times income, 2014 revenue. So very quickly, we forecasted those 9 plus 1 from the assumptions, those 10 ratios. Did that relatively quickly, but awfully straightforward. Now we have to finish the balance sheet, and when we finish balancing the balance sheet and forecasting it, we can't have a circular reference. If our model has a circular reference in it, we made a mistake. All right, so we have to have a model without a circular reference. So I'm going to show you how to do this and avoid the circular reference. We're going to start by finishing up the liabilities and equity side of our balance sheet. So in this case, I'm going to start out by finishing up the equity first. So preferred equity equals the previous year. We didn't change the preferred dividends. We're not going to issue or retire any preferred stock. We're just going to leave it out there. Minority interest equals the previous year. Whatever minority interest they're going to keep. Not going to add, they're not going to subtract. Share capital and additional paid-in capital. Whatever shares they have, they're going to keep. They're not going to issue or buy back any new stock. Retained earnings. We're going to solve for this. Retained earnings equals, for 2014, the 2013 retained earnings, last year's retained earnings, plus, from my income tab, the 2014 change in retained earnings, which is the last line item on the income tab. That's how much the retained earnings will go up or down. So in this case, down. So that will be the retained earnings balance that the business will have next year. I know it says common equity. And I'm going to change this. Bloomberg calls it common equity, but it's really total equity. Is the sum of those 4 things. That's my equity. Common and preferred. Okay. Now, I'm going to finish up the liabilities. Short-term debt. We're not going to change any debt. We didn't change any interest. So whatever debt they have, they keep. Equal the previous year. Total current liabilities, the sum of the 3 numbers above. Accounts payable, short-term borrowings, other short-term liabilities. That's my total current liabilities. Long-term borrowings, equal the previous year. I'm not going to issue any new long-term debt. I'm going to keep whatever long-term debt that I have. Pension liabilities, equal the previous year. If I owe any pension, I'm going to still owe the pension. So it's a liability I have to pay off. I'm also going to assume my pension doesn't grow, because under U.S. law, companies can't have unfunded pension liabilities going forward. Right? The government said you can't do that anymore. So therefore, we're going to assume that any new pension liabilities will be fully funded. So the only ones we have to deal with are historical pension liabilities. I know there could be some short-term timing differences for some companies. We could always forecast those separately, but generally we'll assume that the pension liabilities are not going to grow over time. They're not allowed to, at least under current law. Yes?
They don't decrease over time?
Well, they will decrease over time, but as I said, when we do the valuation, we're going to use the current liability as the amount to subtract from our value. So to be honest with you, we don't care about the future ones unless they're bigger than what they are in present value. That's a good point. Yes, they could theoretically decrease, but for valuation, we care about the current liability. Okay. Long-term liabilities are the sum of those 3 things. The long-term liabilities are the long-term borrowings, the other long-term liabilities, and any pension liabilities. Total liabilities equals the current liabilities plus the long-term liabilities. Total liabilities and equity equals total liabilities plus total equity. 29,743.7. That's the liability and equity side of the balance sheet. Right? Now, I need to forecast a balancing balance sheet. Here's how we're going to do this. We're going to take total assets and we're going to set that equal to liabilities and equity. Voila, our balance sheet balances. I'm going to force it to balance. Now, in order for it to actually work, that means we're going to have what's called a plug. We're going to have to solve for one of the asset items so the balance sheet does indeed balance. The plug is going to be excess cash. That's what we're going to solve for. We're going to solve for excess cash. So, the only non-calculated item that's left that's not excess cash is goodwill. Again, we're not going to forecast acquisitions and how much companies pay for them. It's too hard to do. So whatever goodwill they have, they're going to keep. And under current accounting laws, you no longer amortize goodwill. You only impair it. Therefore, whatever goodwill they have, they're just going to keep. And if they impair it, it has no cash impact anyway, so we don't care. So just goodwill equals goodwill. All right. Now, you'll notice that I did not forecast gross fixed assets and accumulated depreciation. And the reason is because we forecast the net. And because what we care about is the net, and we're going to use the net to solve for CapEx, we don't really need the gross and we don't need the accumulated depreciation. So there's no real reason to forecast that. So I'm not going to. So what that leaves me with is excess cash. So here's how we're going to solve for excess cash. Excess cash equals total assets minus everything else. So total assets minus operating cash minus accounts and notes receivable minus inventory minus other current assets minus long-term investments minus net fixed assets minus goodwill minus other long-term assets. So basically, assets minus everything else. That is our excess cash. If you hit enter, you should not see circular reference. If you see circular reference, then you have to redo it. Now we can finish up the balance sheet. Total current assets, everything above. Total long-term assets, it's the sum of everything from long-term investments down. And if I just want to do a check, equals my long-term assets plus my current assets. And with the plug, those two are equal numbers. Last step. Take my 2014 balance sheet, copy it, paste it out 10 more years to 2024. Highlight these columns, make them a little wider. I now have a balancing balance sheet through 2024. I have 11 years worth of forecasted balance sheets.
Why don't you like to click and drag?
If I click and drag, sometimes what Excel will do, like let's say these are zeros, and if I click and drag the zero, what it'll do is it'll start saying, well, it doesn't always do it. That's the problem. It'll start saying this is a series, and then it'll start making those extra numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then my statements will be a little off, and I won't figure out why. And it's because of the clicking and dragging. And so 9 times out of 10, it doesn't do that, but it's the one time when Microsoft is helpful and you don't want it to be, that it says, aha, you're trying to create a series, so I'm going to make it a series, and you don't realize it did it, then your model's completely screwed up, and it's a very complex model, and you can't figure out why. Right? So it doesn't always do it, and I can't figure out when it does it and when it doesn't do it. So that's why I just avoid the clicking and the dragging, so it doesn't actually screw me up. Yes.
I don't know if I copied it right, but are we supposed to get negative retained earnings in that?
Yes. You should have 36,875.8 in the final year.
Yeah.
Okay. And you'll notice that retained earnings get negative. Anybody want to tell me why? Because we're paying out more in dividends than we're bringing in. So this, and by the way, excess cash, which we solve for, goes really negative. So we can't have negative cash. That means Costco goes bankrupt. So what we're also setting up here is that this $3 billion dividend is probably not sustainable. They did this one-time payout, and they probably can't sustain it going into the future. Not with these assumptions. All right, so that's why we'd have to adjust our ratios to get something more realistic for the future. Yes?
I had a question about the gross fixed assets, rows 11 and 12.
Yep.
Can you go over why you decided to leave those blank?
Well, because what we care about is the net, and gross minus accumulated equals net. So basically, since we're forecasting the net, we'd have to forecast a gross and an accumulated that equals the net. And we don't really care about the gross and the accumulated, we care about the net, so why do the extra work? That's why. All right. Home stretch. We're 3 minutes from the next break. Here's what we have to do to our model. We forecasted 11 years of income statements and balance sheets. Now we need 11 years worth of economic statements. So here's what we're going to do. We go to TFI. We take 2013. We copy it out and we paste it out 11 years to 2024. Equals previous year plus 1. Copy, paste. I now have forecasted and balancing TFI that goes through 2024. All because I've mapped it, I've converted it, and I have relative references. TII. I take 2013. I copy and paste this out to 2024. Equals previous year plus 1. Relative reference for the years. Copy and paste that out. I have balancing TIIs that go out to 2024. CFI, the notorious statement many of you struggled with. I copy and paste this out to 2024, change my relative references for years. I now have balancing and forecasting CFIs that go out 11 years. Economic profit, BOY. I copy and paste this out 11 years. Relative references. So I now have forecasted, and I don't want to go up too far, through 2024 of my economic profit that again balances using both methods. And I have my economic profit based on end of year data. Copy and paste this out 11 years. So I have economic profit based on end of year data saved through 2024. So what we've done in a little over an hour is we've created a model with real data for Costco that forecasts out 11 years worth of financial statements and 11 years worth of economic statements. So we can really have 11 years worth of forecasted cash flows and 11 years worth of forecasted economic profits.
Did you leave some data in on the CFI tab?
Did I?
The row R?
Yeah.
Yes, I did. So what's going to happen, I've set the model up for this, is when we do our historical analysis, again, don't do this right now, but later for your group project, you're going to have to do a 5-year historical CFI. So what we're going to do is we're going to hide all those forecast years, and this total sums up the 5 years historically. So I've kind of prepared you for some of the things to make your lives a little bit easier. So there's a couple of hidden, what do you guys call those things in games when you run across it?
Easter eggs.
Yeah, some Easter eggs for you to make your life a little bit easier. So I'm going to undo the hiding. So you don't hide them because we're going to need this data after the break. All right. So if you've gotten this far, save so you don't lose what you did. And we're going to take a break. When we come back from the break, what we're then going to do is we're going to add the valuation to the cash flows that we have forecasted. And then we'll have the valuation of Costco.